So we're jumping in with some all quiet on the Martian front tactica. And in this vlog, I'm really, really excited to start jumping into this game system, looking at the two different factions, or with the recent releases following the core, some of the newer factions. But before we jump into that, and we look at some of the missions and some of the different ways to build armies, I want to pull out and really go very, very high level. Because what's interesting about All Quiet is it's done a very, very good job, an excellent job of capturing the power of these factions, whether it's the Allies or the Martian invaders, and really representing that technology very, very well. The sides are not necessarily balanced. They're definitely not equal. And for those of us coming into wargaming or from another wargaming system, where we're used to this idea of, okay, you have your faction, I have my faction, but if we play a certain scenario, putting aside historicals for a moment, where we're trying to reenact something where it's never fair, warfare is never fair, but from modern wargaming systems, there tends to be this idea of, yes, you've got your powers, I've got my powers, but your faction, my faction, we go head to head. They're about equal. They're about balance. And you have that type of game. All Quiet, capturing the fact that Martian technology in the beginning is very, very powerful. And as the Allies add more technology, and certainly some of the later units bring in some of that Tesla and other Martian technology, but it is not equal. It is not balanced. I won't say that one side is easier to play than the other, but a high-level view of understanding the core tactica. This is the core tactica, regardless of the mission, regardless of the units, and what you're looking to explore. So that's kind of the background leading into it, and we're going to jump in. So I want to start in this vlog looking at it from unit classification of the Allies and pushing that piece out and how to effectively deal with the Martian tripods, the Martian walkers. And we're, of course, there's different classifications. We're going to just generally speak and generally look at this high top level. So if I break down the human forces, if I break down the Allied forces, we've got mechanized forces in terms of motorbikes that move very, very fast, but they're very, very vulnerable. We've got infantry, which move relatively slow. Most of the time they're on foot. They're very, very numerous. They don't really do a lot of damage. We've got tanks, different classifications of tanks. Now, this is the heavy-hitting firepower of the Allies, of the human side. And the bulk of our forces, of course, are going to include tanks. And that's one of the reasons why I love this game, because I love tanks. And then, if it's available, artillery or long-range support. That's the classification. Now, there's some other units outside of that, or some units that we can put into that. But this is the idea of how we classify our units. When we face the tripods, when we face the Martians, they're very, very powerful. They're going to be vaping multiple units a turn. They're pretty quick moving. I mean, they're not slow, they're not fast, but they're going to be relentless on how they advance, and they can take a lot of damage. So often what you'll see is literally a line of walkers just moving across, blasting stuff with heat rays, throwing the explosives and doing all that type of crazy stuff. So how do we deal with this as the human player? How do we deal with this as the Allies? So the first thing is you cannot, it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to take on all of the Martian forces at once, to effectively engage everything at once. But given their mobility and the fact that they are going to have good numbers, how do you prevent them from breaking through? How do you prevent them from essentially dismantling your army piece by piece? Because you might be able to down a tripod a turn. That's if you're lucky. They're going to be decreasing your forces very, very fast, blasting you with those heat rays and stuff. So the first thing that I look at is, just to make this simple, and we've got the screen up, if there's a line of walkers, when can I, as we begin to get into range, how can I slow down those walkers? How can I tie up some of those walkers? Essentially, I hate to say it, sacrifices will be demanded. How can I sacrifice some of my units to tie them up and take out 2 or 3 walkers or a number of walkers a turn, just to have them deal with it? This is the first aspect of where the bikes come in. You're mechanized. The ability to zoom up and engage. I'm not going to do any damage. I'm going to sacrifice them. If I can buy a turn or two, that's going to take out one or two walkers. It's going to take that out of that turn cycle. So that's the first question I ask of if you have 10 walkers and I can tie up 2 or 3 a turn, that effectively cuts your forces down. But I'm going to be sacrificing these units, so it's not going to be indefinite, and I need to be decisive otherwise. Second to that, infantry are used to funnel the walkers and to block off certain areas of the table. So this idea being of an entire front walking down into my lines, moving across the table, if I can mass my infantry on one side, push them forward, of course I'm going to be engaging, I'm going to be trying to tie stuff up, but they're not as fast as the mechanized. What that's going to do is prevent those walkers from attacking on that side of the table, whether it's mission objectives or it's putting up some barriers for my artillery and support. We'll look at that for a second. But essentially cutting off those walkers from being able to get into range to attack, because now it plays into my tanks. So think of this layered approach where I've got, and I am simplifying it a little bit so we can kind of conceptualize it. You're on your side of the table, I'm on my side of the table. You've got your walkers spread across, they're moving across the table to engage me. If I take those bikes and I move them up quick, I can maybe engage 1 or 2 or 3, depends on the mission. That takes those out of the cycle. If I advance my infantry on one side and I cut off that side of the table, I flood it with infantry, that's going to slow down the walkers on that side. That's going to keep them ideally out of range from being able to shoot my tanks. I'm going to keep all my tanks bunched up so my tanks can effectively engage one walker at a time and just fire away, destroy it. Move on to the next, destroy it. So this idea of almost from the Allies looking at it as sacrificial units to buy you time for the heavy hitters, which are the early technological levels, are your tanks. Now, artillery is kind of interesting because it's fixed. It's very, very powerful. It has tremendous range. A lot of the units in All Quiet, the range bands are such that if I'm shooting you, you can shoot me. This is why I want to try and take some of those tripods out of, some of those walkers out of range by flooding them with infantry, literally blocking them off with infantry. Push them back. So if you have 5 walkers, you can't shoot all 5 at my tanks. If I push them with the infantry, tie them up, get those grappling hooks up there, explosive charges, and then from that perspective, keep you away, I can gang up all my tanks because the tanks have a smaller footprint and the way the squadrons work. The artillery is very, very important if you're playing with that, and support weapons are very important. They're fixed, but they have tremendous range and tremendous hitting power. I find their placement is kind of center in the table or the deployment zone, because if they're in the center, then they have a field of fire, the greatest field of fire. If you castle up on one side or the other, yes, that literally, refuse flank, it prevents your opponent from attacking on that side, but it also, depending on the scope of the mission and the table you're playing on, push things out a little bit forward. I want them to be in the middle. What this means is those walkers are going to try and get there, and it's going to be a little easier because you're literally in the middle of the table or in the middle on your deployment zone. This is where the infantry are also very important, blocking not only the tanks, but trying to block the incoming walkers from getting range on your artillery. And given the rules there, they're very powerful, but they're fixed. They're going to go down pretty fast once they get vaped, and then you're in trouble with that. So from that perspective, that is the human, the allied side, kind of overall tactica that I'm looking to do to bucket list these units and how to play them opportunity on the table. Vlog number 2, we're going to look at the Martians, and we're going to look at the classifications of some of the tripods and other smaller ground units and what they're trying to do from a very top level perspective. And then, of course, we'll jump into the individual machines. And then over on the Allied side, some of those machines, starting with earlier war, or at least that's the term I use, where really All Quiet's pretty interesting because as the game has evolved, it was initially Martian tech, human tech. And then as the humans salvaged things, you're introducing kind of hybrid type stuff. And in a response to evolution, the Martians are introducing new tech, bringing new tech online. And then, of course, other factions when you bring those into play. So I want to kind of stick to that timeline as best as I can, build up an archive here. So if you're new to the game or you're thinking about jumping into the game, or just look, next game you got to bring some more spice, you got to bring some more bite to the table, we will have that archive in that chronological order.